Hi everyone, I'm Moose, and a little while ago I had the chance to sit down with JJ Abrams, director of Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker, mere days after he wrapped production on one of the most anticipated films of all time. JJ and I talked about the mysteries of Star Wars past and what we lose by explaining so much, the future of the series and whether it still has a place in cinema, his thoughts on if the theatrical cuts of the original trilogy will ever see the light of day, and a whole lot more. But first, we talked about what it's like crunching on a blockbuster with a 9-figure budget weeks before it comes out.
I'm JJ Abrams, and you're watching NowThis Nerd.
Who is still involved at this point in the production?
Visual effects are usually being done until the very end. There are usually a handful of shots that are still coming in because there are, like almost 2,000 shots, visual effects shots in the movie. We did a recording session, John Williams' last Star Wars recording session with an orchestra and a full choir last week. So, it was our last session we had. We've had about 10 or 12 sessions. This was always in the schedule. It was just insane to be there realizing we have, a month before the movie comes out, and there are 100 musicians playing music that will go to the movie. So it was super close.
When you're doing something on such a massive global scale, I imagine there's a lot of cuts being passed between people, a lot of scripts that may or may not end up in hotel rooms. How do you sort of keep things secret in a project as big as this? It's not like Return of the Jedi, you just call it Blue Harvest and no one knows what you're doing. How do you sort of maintain that secrecy while working with so many different partners all over the world?
Right. Well, it's a double-edged sword in a way. That the thing that you desperately hope for is that people care, that they're interested. When you have people who are interested and care, they're peeking in and trying to figure out what it is you're doing. And so there are leaks and there are reports, and sometimes they're entirely wrong and other times they're close to what it is. It's amazing to me how much has been kept secret despite the number of people who have been working on this project. I mean, when you look at everyone, not just on the set, which is hundreds and hundreds of people, and the actors and the background actors, who aren't there every day, who might be more inclined to speak about what was going on but haven't. But to the thousands of visual effects people who see this thing, the people in editorial, the people all through post-production, there are so many people. When you see those 9 minutes of credits at the end and literally thousands and thousands of names, it's insane to me that more doesn't get released.
I can't think of a single series that has sparked more speculation and imagination and questions than Star Wars. And as it sort of originally existed, there was a lot more mystery, right? The Clone Wars was just something offhandedly mentioned in that conversation between Luke and Ben.
You fought in the Clone Wars?
Yes. I was once a Jedi Knight, the same as your father.
And, when you're a kid, you're just like, what were the Clone Wars? Was there a mutant army of clones?
Well, that was why, for me, the prequel trilogy was less my thing. Partly because, I don't want to know about midichlorians. I don't want to know that the Force comes from something that's in your blood. I'm not saying that's not what it is. And if that's what it is for George, then that's what it is. But it just wasn't interesting to me the way, the idea of an energy that surrounds and binds us, together. Like that to me feels like something that I can believe in and invest in a way that doesn't necessarily need rational thought and explanation.
I don't understand.
Do we lose sort of a little bit of the magic when you set things in stone? What is the balance of do I want to explain this or do I want to leave this a mystery?
But that's the question with every story, which is how much do you need to explicitly explain? And I would argue in some cases, a lot and enough, and in some cases, the fun is not knowing, and some movies and some stories play on that, Pulp Fiction, if you knew what was in that case, it wouldn't be as good as not knowing, If 2001 ended with a completely logical, easy to explain, ending, we might not be talking about it today. Those are examples of extreme mystery, but I feel like, in something like Star Wars, it ultimately is a family film, and you have to be able to make things understandable to the whole family on some level. And I think, answers are really important, which is why doing Rise of Skywalker, we wanted to make sure people were given concrete answers to some fundamental questions. Not to demystify everything, but to make sure that people left feeling like it was a conclusion.
Is there one Star Wars mystery that, like, even you, given your sort of inside position, is there one thing in Star Wars you never want to learn the answer to? Something you just want to stay mysterious forever?
I'm sure there are a lot of those things, but you know, my favorite thing, and you mentioned this earlier, my favorite thing about the original trilogy was the sort of offhand reference to things that you didn't understand but didn't need to, because it painted a picture on its own of the kind of peripheral vision of what was happening in Star Wars. You know, you knew what you were looking at, but the references to, you know, the old wars, the references to the Senate, the Emperor, you know, there were these things that you felt the scope and scale of this world without needing to spend time in the Senate. You know, you just knew, damn, I believe this entire world because it's being so brilliantly, you know, referred to, but I don't necessarily need to be in that thing or understand the mechanics of that thing. It's almost like a Japanese fairy tale that, you know, you'd hear, and you know, there'd be references to things culturally that you might not understand, that I might not understand, but you can infer what the meaning is. And weirdly, sometimes there's more resonant power in not understanding everything than there is in getting to spend time in the Senate.
I subscribed to Disney Plus. Before I even watched The Mandalorian, the first thing I did was queue up that gorgeous 4K transfer of A New Hope. We get to the cantina, there's the devil guy, there's the wolf man. Han Solo sits down with a nice little bounty hunter named Greedo.
And what does he say?
He says, McClunky, and they shoot at the same time.
Yeah.
McClunky.
Would you, as a fan, like to see the theatrical versions made available commercially?
Yes, and I have asked about this. This is, well, because who wouldn't want to see that? But I've been told that for reasons that I don't quite understand, that's not necessarily possible.
Interesting.
Which is, you know, too bad, because that was the thing that I loved. In fact, it's funny, when we were working on Force Awakens, we were talking about this one scene with Vader and the Emperor, and we were having this disagreement about what was said in a way that was like, we both felt crazy. And we realized we were talking about two different versions, because there's like the sort of despecialized version, which you can see online. You know, someone got me a version, but it's apparently not at the quality level that, you know, one needs to release it on a 4K version. And then there was the official version. So there was the original theatrical version, and then the version that people see now. I guess it's what George Lucas wanted, and that's what he did. And so I respect that, although I also feel like there's something about the original theatrical version that was, you know, for so many people, the thing like you referenced that people were going crazy about, that they loved, as it was. And so, you know, it would be great to have that available for a mainstream audience.
A New Hope's not even in the Library of Congress because they would only accept the original theatrical cut. I guess
You have a lot of information, Charlie.
well, I'm a nerd. That's my job. As a director yourself, though, I mean, have you ever wanted to go back and change something? Like, would
Oh
you
my
ever?
God! Yes, of course. But I also feel like, you know, when at a certain point you have to say, this is what it is. And for me, I you know, the idea of going back and making an incremental change or an adjustment to this or that, it just doesn't. It's not interesting to me. But I respect the, you know, the impulse of artists to continue to work on their stuff.
At a certain point, it's just pencils down, walk away, right?
Well, it's like, you know, when you watch a little kid draw a picture and they're like, I'm done. And they just know that they're done. And you're like, how the hell do you know you're done? Maybe there's more, you could do more shading, you know, but they just know they're done. And I think that at a certain point, that can be a very healthy thing.
Well, when did you know you were done with The Rise of Skywalker?
We've been working on this story for a couple years, and as the thing became more clear to us, not what we wanted to do as much as what we could tell was happening, you know, with the story. At a certain point, you know, you can either say, I'm just going to continue to tinker forever, which I get, or you can say, this is telling the story, this is working, this is making people feel things. But, you know, when you start to show the thing and you know, and people are confused, and they don't understand something, they don't think something's funny that you did, they think that something, you know, isn't emotional that you were hoping was, you keep working. There is a moment where you can go too far, And tinkering to perfect something can actually weirdly get in the way of something that, while maybe imperfect, is moving, you know, or effective. So I feel like there's no perfect science to it, but I think at a certain point you know that scene, that sequence, that reel, that movie is done.
Where do you see Star Wars 10 years from now? Will it still be a theatrical experience in 10 years?
I think it is a human natural need to have true, not virtual communal experiences. That the idea of being in a room, you know, with other people, coming together with, you know, this group of strangers to mutually experience this thing, you know, simultaneously and to hear other people react and to have them hear you react. There's something about that I would hate to think would ever go away, but it's increasingly hard to justify leaving your house. You know, and everyone talks about, oh, you know, parents with kids and the cost of parking, all that's real. Like, it's actually like, you know, so you think, well, we have to eventize these movies. But the more you eventize them, the more they become sort of amusement park rides. The more they become things that are not necessarily always the deepest, always the most meaningful, always the most, you know, resonant. They become the sort of, you know, more bombastic and pyrotechnic, spectacular thing. And that's not to say those are bad, because, you know, we all love a great and well-told, spectacular movie. But I think it's important that theaters are, you know, not just for Star Wars, but for everything, are creating reasons to go. I mean, I don't know about you, but when you go to a small theater, not in a major city, it's often a pretty bad experience. That the screens aren't great, the picture's not fantastic, the sound's not good. A lot of times the sort of flat screen TV you have at home is a better viewing experience than, you know. Theaters need to give people a reason to go, and not just that the movies have to be great, but that the experience of being there needs to be special. So I feel like there's a lot of conversation about sort of ways to do that, and I think that the need to be in a dark room with a lot of people won't go away. But I love movies, you know, as much as anything, and it would be a horrible thing if those didn't exist, not just for Star Wars.
I mean, I know you've probably told yourself this before, but you are done with Star Wars now, and you and Bad Robot have just signed a deal with Warner. What's next for JJ Abrams? What interests you? What is your next creative challenge? I
feel like there's a chapter coming at least for Bad Robot, that, you know, I hope is as much about creating new worlds and stories and characters as anything. And I'm all for, you know, wherever the idea and inspiration comes from. I think that we all sort of agree, maybe even especially moviegoers, you can't keep cannibalizing the stuff that pre-exists, and part of the fun of something, of creating something, is creating something from scratch. I know that we're here talking about Star Wars, but Star Wars wouldn't exist if Flash Gordon hadn't existed. The fact that George Lucas said, I'm inspired by that, I'm inspired by Kurosawa, I'm inspired by Joseph Campbell, but, you know, here's my take on it, you know, it's like that sort of thing, which is sort of how Hollywood has typically worked until somewhat recently. You know, I feel like that's not a huge shift, you know, from seeing something saying, let's remake that thing. It's like, be inspired by it, and then let's come up with our own thing. So I know what I've done, I know what I've worked on, and I'm very much looking forward to working on things that are original ideas.
What are you doing there, 3PO?
Taking one last look, sir, at my friends.
Thanks for watching, everyone, and thank you, JJ Abrams, for sitting down to talk with us. What are you hoping to see with Rise of the Skywalker? Will it be a satisfying conclusion? Are you ready to move on from the Skywalker Saga? And what will the future of Star Wars look like? Leave a comment, let us know, and as always, please subscribe to Now This Nerd.